The helicopter blades chopped through the thick morning air as Master Chief Jake Morrison checked his watch. 48 hours ago, their mission had been simple: extract a high-valued target from a remote compound deep in the Carpathian Mountains. Now, as he looked down at the endless canopy of dark green trees stretching in every direction, Jake knew something had gone terribly wrong. LZ is coming up hot. "Chief," shouted Petty Officer Danny Walsh over the rotor noise. The young explosives expert gripped his rifle tighter as he peered out the open door. Below them, the forest looked like a living carpet that had swallowed the world whole. Jake's team was the best the Navy had to offer. Besides Walsh, there was Petty Officer Marcus Tank Thompson, their heavy weapons specialist whose massive frame barely fit in the helicopter seat. Senior Chief Ray Foster sat across from him, methodically checking his sniper rifle for the third time. The oldest member of their unit, Foster had more confirmed kills than the rest of them combined. Rounding out the team was Hospital Corpsman Second Class Luis Ramirez, their medic, who was currently reviewing satellite photos of their target area. 30 seconds to drop zone, the pilot called back. Through his headset, Jake could hear the strain in the man's voice. They had been flying through strange weather patterns for the last hour. Thick fog banks appeared from nowhere, and the GPS kept glitching, showing impossible readings. The helicopter touched down in a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees that seemed to block out most of the sunlight. As soon as the team jumped out with their gear, the pilot gave them a worried look. "Something's not right about this place, Chief. My instruments are going crazy. Radio's full of static too." Jake nodded grimly. He had noticed the same thing during their approach. The forest felt different somehow, like it was watching them. "Stick to the extraction timeline. We'll be back here in 6 hours." The helicopter lifted off, leaving the 5 SEALs alone in the clearing. The silence that followed was unnatural. No bird songs, no insect buzzing, just the whisper of wind through the branches high above. Even their bootsteps on the forest floor seemed muffled. "Which way, Chief?" Tank asked, shouldering his machine gun. The big man's usual confidence seemed shaken by the oppressive atmosphere of the woods. Jake consulted his compass, then frowned. The needle was spinning slowly in circles. He pulled out his GPS unit, but the screen showed only static. "Well, that's just great," he muttered. "Old-school navigation it is." Using the position of the sun and their dropped coordinates, Jake led his team deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker as they moved inland, their trunks so wide that it would take 3 men holding hands to circle one. Moss hung from the branches like tattered curtains, and the air grew colder with each step. After 2 hours of hiking, Ramirez called for a halt. "Chief, something's wrong with these readings." He held up a small device that measured electromagnetic fields. "This thing is going nuts. Whatever's in this forest, it's putting out some kind of interference." Foster, who had been bringing up the rear, jogged forward. "We're being watched," he said quietly. "Have been for the last hour. I can feel eyes on us, but every time I turn around, there's nothing there." Jake felt it too. The sensation of being studied, measured, hunted. His team was trained to operate in hostile territory, but this felt different, more personal somehow.
"Stay sharp, boys."
"We stick together and we complete the mission." They continued deeper into the woods, following what might have been an old animal trail. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the path twisted in ways that didn't make sense. More than once, Jake was certain they had walked in a complete circle, yet his compass insisted they were still heading north. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Walsh suddenly stopped. "Chief, look at this." He was pointing at a tree trunk. Carved into the bark about 8 feet off the ground was a symbol none of them recognized. It looked like a crosshair combined with some kind of ancient rune. "How old do you think that is?" Tank asked, studying the carving. "Fresh," Foster said, running his finger along the cuts. "Maybe a day or 2 at most." His sniper's eyes scanned the surrounding trees. Someone marked this territory recently. The realization hit all of them at the same time. They weren't alone in this forest, and whoever else was here had known they were coming. Jake felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up as he considered the implications. Their mission intel had mentioned no other military presence in the area. "Defensive positions," Jake ordered quietly. His team moved with practiced efficiency, each man covering a different direction. They waited for 5 minutes, listening to the forest around them. Still nothing but that unnatural silence. When they resumed their march, Jake noticed that Ramirez kept checking his medical supplies. "What's eating you, Doc?" he asked during a brief rest. It's probably nothing, Chief, Ramirez replied, but his voice carried doubt. It's just that some of these plants, I've never seen anything like them before. And the animals, where are all the animals? Even in the worst combat zones, you see birds, insects, something. This place feels dead. As if summoned by his words, a single raven landed on a branch directly above them. The bird fixed them with one black eye, tilted its head, and let out a harsh cry that echoed through the trees. Then it spread its wings and flew away, but not before dropping something that landed at Jake's feet. He picked up the object and felt his blood run cold. It was a military dog tag, but not one he recognized. The metal was old and tarnished, and the name stamped on it was in a language he couldn't read. More disturbing was the date. 3 years ago. Chief, Tank called softly from his position 20 yards ahead. You need to see this. Jake pocketed the dog tag and moved forward. Tank was standing at the edge of what had once been a campsite. Military gear was scattered around a cold fire pit, but everything was covered in moss and decay. Sleeping bags lay rotting on the ground, and rusted weapons were half buried in the forest floor. Someone else got lost in here, Foster observed, examining a rifle that looked like it had been left to the elements for years. Question is, what happened to them? As if in answer to his question, a gunshot rang out from somewhere deep in the forest. The sound echoed off the trees, making it impossible to determine the direction. Jake's team immediately took cover behind the massive tree trunks, weapons ready. Single shot, Foster reported. High-powered rifle, maybe 300 yards out. Could be our target, Walsh suggested hopefully. But Jake didn't think so. Something about that shot felt wrong, like it had been fired as a warning rather than in combat. Or worse, like someone was announcing their presence to the forest and everything in it. As darkness began to fall, Jake made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. We make camp here tonight. Set up a perimeter and post watches. Tomorrow we find our target and get the hell out of this place. None of them slept well that night. The forest around them seemed to pulse with unseen life, and more than once each man was certain he heard footsteps circling their camp. But when morning came, they found no tracks, no signs that anyone had been there. They had no way of knowing that high above them, hidden in the canopy of the ancient trees, someone had been watching their every move since the moment they entered the forest. Someone who knew these woods better than they knew their own reflection. Someone who had been waiting a very long time for visitors to arrive. The hunt was about to begin. Dawn broke gray and cold over the ancient forest, filtering through the canopy in thin shafts of pale light. Jake Morrison woke to the sound of absolute silence, which in his experience was never a good sign. Even the wind had stopped, leaving the woods feeling like a tomb carved from living wood. Chief, we got a problem, Foster whispered from his watch position. The sniper's voice carried an edge that Jake had only heard once before, during a firefight in Afghanistan that had lasted 14 hours. Tank's gone. Jake bolted upright, his hand automatically finding his sidearm. Around their small campsite, he could see Walsh and Ramirez stirring in their sleeping bags, but Tank's position near the fallen log was empty. His gear was still there, his weapon propped against the makeshift seat, but the big man had vanished without a trace. When did you last see him? Jake asked, moving quietly to Tank's position. The massive SEAL would never abandon his post voluntarily, and he was too experienced to wander off in hostile territory. I relieved him at 0300, Foster replied. He said he was going to get some sleep. That was 4 hours ago. Jake examined the ground around Tank's sleeping area. The forest floor was soft with decades of fallen leaves, but he could find no clear footprints leading away from the camp. It was as if Tank had simply evaporated into the morning mist. Maybe he went to take a leak, Walsh suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. They all knew Tank would have awakened someone before leaving the perimeter. Ramirez was checking his equipment, methodically going through his medical kit. Chief, something else is wrong. My morphine is missing. 3 vials gone. I know I had them yesterday. Jake felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 2 mysteries before breakfast was too many in his book. Gear up. We find Tank, then we complete the mission and get out of here. They spent an hour searching the immediate area, moving in careful patterns that would have revealed any normal trail. But the forest seemed to swallow evidence like a hungry beast. No broken branches, no disturbed earth, no sign that a 240-pound man had passed through in any direction. This doesn't make sense, Walsh muttered, kicking at a pile of leaves. People don't just disappear. But as they expanded their search, Jake began to suspect that in this place maybe they did. The forest felt different in the morning light, somehow larger and more maze-like than it had the day before. Trees that he was certain had been to their east were now standing to the south. Paths that had been clear the night before were now blocked by fallen logs that looked like they had been there for decades. It was Foster who found the first real clue. "Chief, over here," he called from a position about 50 yards from their camp. When Jake reached him, the sniper was staring up into the canopy of a massive oak tree. 20 feet above the ground, Tank's helmet was wedged between two branches. There was no way the big man could have climbed that high without equipment, and there was no rope or ladder in sight. "How the hell did that get up there?" Walsh asked, following Jake's gaze. But it was Ramirez who voiced what they were all thinking. Maybe the question isn't how it got up there. Maybe it's what put it there. Jake was about to respond when a gunshot cracked through the morning air. This time the sound was much closer, maybe 100 yards to their north. A single precise shot that echoed off the trees and seemed to hang in the air longer than physics should have allowed. "Move," Jake ordered, and his team fell into formation automatically. They advanced through the forest with the smooth coordination of men who had trained together for years, each covering the other's blind spots, communicating with hand signals and shared understanding. They found Tank 15 minutes later. The big seal was sitting propped against a tree, his eyes closed, looking almost peaceful. For a moment, Jake felt relief flood through him. Then he noticed the small, perfectly round hole in Tank's forehead, and the relief turned to ice in his veins. "Sniper," Foster said unnecessarily, his professional eye taking in the scene. "Single shot, probably from long range. Clean kill." Walsh was checking Tank's gear, his hands shaking slightly. "His ammo's gone, Chief, all of it. And his sidearm." The explosives expert's voice cracked on the last word. Jake knelt beside his fallen teammate, fighting back the rage that threatened to cloud his judgment. Tank had been with the team for 3 years, had saved all their lives more times than Jake could count. Now he was gone, killed by an enemy they hadn't even seen. But something about the scene bothered him. Tank was sitting upright, his hands folded in his lap, almost like he had been posed. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that he had even tried to defend himself. Either he had been shot while sleeping or... "Chief," Ramirez called softly, "look at this." The medic was pointing to Tank's neck where a small puncture wound was visible just below his ear. "Injection site," Ramirez diagnosed. Someone drugged him before they shot him. The implications were terrifying. Their enemy wasn't just skilled with a rifle. They were close enough to drug Tank without waking the others, knowledgeable enough to know exactly what chemicals to use. This wasn't random violence or even military action. This was something else entirely. "We're being hunted," Foster said quietly, voicing what they all understood. "Someone's playing with us." Jake stood up, his mind racing through tactical options. They were 3 men down to 4, in unfamiliar territory, facing an enemy who knew the terrain and had already proven they could strike without warning. Every instinct told him to call for extraction immediately. But as he reached for his radio, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Laughter. Soft, feminine laughter drifting through the trees like smoke. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the forest floor and canopy until it surrounded them completely. "Did you hear that?" Walsh whispered, his rifle swinging in nervous arcs as he searched for a target. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by a voice that carried clearly through the still air. "You boys look lost." The accent was hard to place. European but with American inflections. Cultured but with an edge of something wild underneath. Jake's team formed a defensive circle, backs to each other, weapons ready, but the voice seemed to move around them, sometimes coming from the trees above, sometimes from the undergrowth, sometimes from directions that should have been impossible. "Show yourself," Jake called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his system. "Oh, I will," the voice replied, and now it carried a note of amusement that was somehow more frightening than outright hostility. "But not yet. We're just getting started and I want to savor this. It's been so long since I had proper playmates." Another gunshot rang out and bark exploded from a tree inches from Foster's head. The sniper dove for cover, returning fire in the direction the shot had come from, but his bullets found only empty forest. "One shot, one kill," the voice called out, and the laughter returned. "That's the rule I live by. Your friend learned that this morning. Though I must say he lasted longer than most. Such a big, strong man. It was almost a shame to put him down. Jake felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Anger would get them all killed. "What do you want?" he shouted. "Want?" The voice seemed to consider this. "I want what I've always wanted. The hunt, the challenge. The moment when strong men realize they're not the predators they thought they were." A twig snapped somewhere to their left, and Walsh spun toward the sound, finger on his trigger. But there was nothing there except shadows and the endless maze of trees. "You see?" the voice continued, conversational now, as if they were discussing the weather. "Most people who come into my forest are just tourists, hikers who got lost, researchers who bit off more than they could chew. But you boys, you're different. You're hunters yourselves. This might actually be fun." Foster was scanning the canopy through his scope, looking for any sign of movement. "I can't get a fix on her position," he reported quietly. "Sounds bouncing off everything." "Her?" Jake questioned. "Definitely female," Foster confirmed. "And she knows these woods like her own backyard. We're not dealing with some weekend warrior here." The voice laughed again, apparently having overheard their conversation. "Smart man with the long rifle. Yes, boys, you're being hunted by a woman. Does that hurt your professional pride? Does it make you angry? Good. Angry men make mistakes." Jake made a decision that went against every tactical manual he had ever read. "Fall back to the clearing," he ordered. "We call for extraction and get out of here. This isn't our fight anymore." But as they began to move, the voice called out one last time, and the words it spoke made Jake's blood freeze in his veins. "Run if you want, soldier boys. But you'll never make it to your landing zone. This forest has a way of turning people around, making them lose their way, and I'll be watching every step you take, waiting for the perfect moment to drop each one of you, just like I did your big friend." The forest fell silent again, but somehow the silence felt different now. It felt like the quiet before a storm, pregnant with violence and death. Jake knew they were in for the fight of their lives, and he wasn't even sure they could win. Dawn broke gray and cold over the ancient forest, filtering through the canopy in thin shafts of pale light. Jake Morrison woke to the sound of absolute silence, which in his experience was never a good sign. Even the wind had stopped, leaving the woods feeling like a tomb carved from living wood. "Chief, we got a problem," Foster whispered from his watch position. The sniper's voice carried an edge that Jake had only heard once before, during a firefight in Afghanistan that had lasted 14 hours. "Tank's gone." Jake bolted upright, his hand automatically finding his sidearm. Around their small campsite, he could see Walsh and Ramirez stirring in their sleeping bags, but Tank's position near the fallen log was empty. His gear was still there, his weapon propped against the makeshift seat, but the big man had vanished without a trace. "When did you last see him?" Jake asked, moving quietly to Tank's position. The massive SEAL would never abandon his post voluntarily, and he was too experienced to wander off in hostile territory. "I relieved him at 0300, Foster replied. "He said he was going to get some sleep. That was 4 hours ago." Jake examined the ground around Tank's sleeping area. The forest floor was soft with decades of fallen leaves, but he could find no clear footprints leading away from the camp. It was as if Tank had simply evaporated into the morning mist. "Maybe he went to take a leak," Walsh suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. They all knew Tank would have awakened someone before leaving the perimeter. Ramirez was checking his equipment, methodically going through his medical kit. "Chief, something else is wrong. My morphine is missing. 3 vials gone. I know I had them yesterday." Jake felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 2 mysteries before breakfast was too many in his book. "Gear up. We find Tank, then we complete the mission and get out of here." They spent an hour searching the immediate area, moving in careful patterns that would have revealed any normal trail. But the forest seemed to swallow evidence like a hungry beast. No broken branches, no disturbed earth, no sign that a 240-pound man had passed through in any direction. "This doesn't make sense," Walsh muttered, kicking at a pile of leaves. "People don't just disappear." But as they expanded their search, Jake began to suspect that in this place maybe they did. The forest felt different in the morning light, somehow larger and more maze-like than it had the day before. Trees that he was certain had been to their east were now standing to the south. Paths that had been clear the night before were now blocked by fallen logs that looked like they had been there for decades. It was Foster who found the first real clue. "Chief, over here," He called from a position about 50 yards from their camp. When Jake reached him, the sniper was staring up into the canopy of a massive oak tree. 20 feet above the ground, Tank's helmet was wedged between two branches. There was no way the big man could have climbed that high without equipment, and there was no rope or ladder in sight. How the hell did that get up there? Walsh asked, following Jake's gaze. But it was Ramirez who voiced what they were all thinking. Maybe the question isn't how it got up there. Maybe it's what put it there. Jake was about to respond when a gunshot cracked through the morning air. This time the sound was much closer, maybe 100 yards to their north. A single precise shot that echoed off the trees and seemed to hang in the air longer than physics should have allowed. "Move," Jake ordered, and his team fell into formation automatically. They advanced through the forest with the smooth coordination of men who had trained together for years, each covering the other's blind spots, communicating with hand signals and shared understanding. They found Tank 15 minutes later. The big SEAL was sitting propped against a tree, his eyes closed, looking almost peaceful. For a moment, Jake felt relief flood through him. Then he noticed the small, perfectly round hole in Tank's forehead, and the relief turned to ice in his veins. "Sniper," Foster said unnecessarily, his professional eye taking in the scene. "Single shot, probably from long range. Clean kill." Walsh was checking Tank's gear, his hands shaking slightly. "His ammo's gone, Chief, all of it. And his sidearm." The explosives expert's voice cracked on the last word. Jake knelt beside his fallen teammate, fighting back the rage that threatened to cloud his judgment. Tank had been with the team for 3 years, had saved all their lives more times than Jake could count. Now he was gone, killed by an enemy they hadn't even seen. But something about the scene bothered him. Tank was sitting upright, his hands folded in his lap, almost like he had been posed. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that he had even tried to defend himself. Either he had been shot while sleeping or... "Chief," Ramirez called softly, "look at this." The medic was pointing to Tank's neck where a small puncture wound was visible just below his ear. "Injection site," Ramirez diagnosed. Someone drugged him before they shot him. The implications were terrifying. Their enemy wasn't just skilled with a rifle. They were close enough to drug Tank without waking the others, knowledgeable enough to know exactly what chemicals to use. This wasn't random violence or even military action. This was something else entirely. "We're being hunted," Foster said quietly, voicing what they all understood. "Someone's playing with us." Jake stood up, his mind racing through tactical options. They were 3 men down to 4, in unfamiliar territory, facing an enemy who knew the terrain and had already proven they could strike without warning. Every instinct told him to call for extraction immediately. But as he reached for his radio, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Laughter. Soft, feminine laughter drifting through the trees like smoke. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the forest floor and canopy until it surrounded them completely. "Did you hear that?" Walsh whispered, his rifle swinging in nervous arcs as he searched for a target. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by a voice that carried clearly through the still air. "You boys look lost." The accent was hard to place, European but with American inflections, cultured but with an edge of something wild underneath. Jake's team formed a defensive circle, backs to each other, weapons ready, but the voice seemed to move around them, sometimes coming from the trees above, sometimes from the undergrowth, sometimes from directions that should have been impossible. "Show yourself," Jake called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his system. "Oh, I will," the voice replied, and now it carried a note of amusement that was somehow more frightening than outright hostility. "But not yet. We're just getting started and I want to savor this. It's been so long since I had proper playmates." Another gunshot rang out and bark exploded from a tree inches from Foster's head. The sniper dove for cover, returning fire in the direction the shot had come from, but his bullets found only empty forest. "One shot, one kill," the voice called out, and the laughter returned. "That's the rule I live by. Your friend learned that this morning, though I must say he lasted longer than most. Such a big, strong man. It was almost a shame to put him down." Jake felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Anger would get them all killed. "What do you want?" he shouted. "Want?" The voice seemed to consider this. "I want what I've always wanted. The hunt, the challenge. The moment when strong men realize they're not the predators they thought they were, A twig snapped somewhere to their left, and Walsh spun toward the sound, finger on his trigger. But there was nothing there except shadows and the endless maze of trees. "You see?" the voice continued, conversational now, as if they were discussing the weather. "Most people who come into my forest are just tourists, hikers who got lost, researchers who bit off more than they could chew. But you boys, you're different. You're hunters yourselves. This might actually be fun." Foster was scanning the canopy through his scope, looking for any sign of movement. "I can't get a fix on her position," he reported quietly. "Sounds bouncing off everything." "Her?" Jake questioned. "Definitely female," Foster confirmed. "And she knows these woods like her own backyard. We're not dealing with some weekend warrior here." The voice laughed again, apparently having overheard their conversation. "Smart man with the long rifle. Yes, boys, you're being hunted by a woman. Does that hurt your professional pride? Does it make you angry? Good. Angry men make mistakes." Jake made a decision that went against every tactical manual he had ever read. "Fall back to the clearing," he ordered. "We call for extraction and get out of here. This isn't our fight anymore." But as they began to move, the voice called out one last time, and the words it spoke made Jake's blood freeze in his veins. "Run if you want, soldier boys. But you'll never make it to your landing zone. This forest has a way of turning people around, making them lose their way, and I'll be watching every step you take, waiting for the perfect moment to drop each one of you, just like I did your big friend." The forest fell silent again, but somehow the silence felt different now. It felt like the quiet before a storm, pregnant with violence and death. Jake knew they were in for the fight of their lives, and he wasn't even sure they could win. The trek back toward their extraction point became a nightmare of twisted paths and impossible geography. What should have been a 2-hour march stretched into 4, then 6, as the forest seemed to rearrange itself around them. Trails that Jake was certain they had followed the day before simply vanished, replaced by dense thickets of thorns that looked like they had been growing undisturbed for decades. "Chief, this isn't right," Walsh panted, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "We should have reached that ridge by now. We should be able to see the landing zone." Jake checked his compass for the 100th time, watching the needle spin lazily in circles. Their GPS units were still dead, showing nothing but static. Even his backup navigation tools seemed to be failing in this place. "Stay close and stay alert," he ordered. "She's still out there." Foster had taken point, his sniper's instincts keeping them alive as they moved through the increasingly hostile terrain. Every few hundred yards he would signal for a halt, his head tilted as he listened to sounds that only he could hear. "She's following us," he reported during one such stop. "Staying back about 300 yards, matching our pace. Can you get a shot?" Jake asked. Foster shook his head grimly. "She's too smart. Keeps to heavy cover. Never stays in one place long enough. And the way sound travels in here," he gestured at the canopy above them, "I'd be shooting blind." Ramirez was struggling with the psychological impact of their situation. The medic had always been the most optimistic member of their team, but now his hands shook as he checked his equipment for the 3rd time in an hour. "Chief, what if we can't get out of here? What if this place doesn't want to let us go?" Before Jake could answer, a new sound reached them through the trees. Singing. A woman's voice, haunting and beautiful, drifting through the forest like smoke. The melody was unfamiliar, in a language none of them recognized, but the tone was unmistakably mocking. "She's playing with us," Walsh snarled, his finger tightening on his rifle's trigger, treating this like some kind of game. But Jake was beginning to understand that for their hunter, this wasn't just a game. It was something deeper, more primal. The woman in the trees was enjoying herself, but there was a deadly seriousness underneath the playfulness. She was teaching them something about fear, about being helpless, about what it felt like to be prey. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by the sharp crack of a rifle shot. This time, the bullet found its mark. Walsh cried out and spun around, his left shoulder blooming red as he crashed into a tree. The impact was enough to knock him down, but not enough to put him out of the fight. "Flesh wound," he gasped, even as Ramirez rushed to his side. She could have killed me if she wanted to. That was what made it so terrifying. Their hunter wasn't trying for kill shots anymore. She was wounding them, slowing them down, making them easier to track, like a cat playing with mice before delivering the final blow. Ramirez worked quickly to bandage Walsh's shoulder while Foster and Jake provided cover. The medic's training took over, his hand steady now that he had something concrete to do. Bullet went clean through, he reported. No major damage, but he's going to be hurting. Can you move? Jake asked Walsh, who was already struggling to his feet. I'm not dying in this place, Walsh replied through gritted teeth. Let's keep going. But their pace slowed considerably after that. Walsh tried to hide his pain, but Jake could see the way he favored his left side, the way his breathing became more labored with each step, and their hunter seemed to sense their weakness like a shark sensing blood in the water. The attacks became more frequent, a shot that knocked Foster's rifle from his hands, the bullet passing so close to his fingers that it left powder burns, another that put a hole through Jake's pack, destroying their emergency rations. Each shot was perfectly placed, designed to harass and demoralize rather than kill. She's hurting us, Foster realized during a brief rest, pushing us away from the extraction point deeper into the forest. Jake looked around at the trees surrounding them, noting how they seemed larger and older than the ones they had seen before. The canopy was thicker here, blocking out almost all direct sunlight and casting everything in a perpetual twilight. Strange fungi grew on the tree trunks, glowing with a faint phosphorescence that made the forest feel alien and otherworldly. How long has she been out here? Ramirez wondered aloud. How does someone learn to move through trees like that? As if summoned by his question, the voice drifted down from somewhere above them, long enough to know every root and branch, every hiding spot and killing ground. The woman sounded closer now, though they still couldn't see her. Long enough to forget what the outside world looks like or why I ever wanted to leave this place. Jake decided to try a different approach. What's your name? He called out. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then unexpectedly came an answer. Call me Echo. It's what the forest calls me anyway. The sound that comes back when someone screams. Echo, Jake repeated. What happened to the last team that came through here? The ones whose gear we found? Oh, them. Echo's voice carried a note of fond remembrance. They lasted almost a week. Very impressive. Of course, they weren't quite as well trained as you boys. Not military. Just some corporate security types who thought they could handle anything the wilderness could throw at them. Foster was scanning the trees again, his eyes tracking movement that the others couldn't see. She's moving, he whispered. Repositioning for another shot. But this time, Jake was ready. He had been studying the pattern of her attacks, the way she used the canopy to mask her position. When I give the word, everyone scatter, he ordered quietly. Different directions, meet at that fallen log 50 yards north. The gunshot came right on schedule, but this time Jake's team was already moving. The bullet passed through empty air where Walsh had been standing a second before. And for just an instant, Jake caught a glimpse of muzzle flash from high in the branches of an ancient oak. Foster saw it too. His return shot was immediate and precise, sending bark flying from the tree where their attacker had been hidden. But by the time the echoes faded, Echo was already gone, leaving only the scent of gunpowder and the sound of mocking laughter. Close, Echo called out, her voice already coming from a different direction, but not close enough. You boys are learning, though. That's good. I like a challenge. They regrouped at the fallen log, all of them breathing hard. Walsh's shoulder was bleeding again, and Jake could see the exhaustion starting to wear on all of them. They had been running on adrenaline and training for hours, but even SEALs had their limits. We need to change tactics, Jake decided. She's got us on the defensive, reacting to her moves. We need to start dictating the engagement. What did you have in mind? Foster asked, though Jake could see the skepticism in the sniper's eyes. We set a trap, use ourselves as bait, and try to draw her into a kill zone. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but Jake couldn't think of any other option. She's been playing with us, showing off. Maybe it's time to use that arrogance against her. Ramirez was checking his medical supplies again, taking inventory of what they had left. I've got enough morphine for one more emergency, he reported. After that, we're down to bandages and antiseptic. Won't need it, Walsh said with forced confidence. We're getting out of here today. But even as he spoke, the forest around them seemed to grow darker and more oppressive. The strange fungi on the trees glowed brighter as the natural light faded, creating an otherworldly landscape that felt more like the setting for a nightmare than any place on Earth. And somewhere in the canopy above them, Echo was watching and waiting, her rifle ready, her patience infinite. She had hunted in these woods for years, perfecting her craft, and she had never met prey that could truly challenge her. But these SEALs were different. They were fighting back, adapting, learning. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Echo felt something she had almost forgotten. Excitement. Real, genuine excitement at the prospect of a hunt that might actually test her skills. She settled herself more comfortably in her treetop perch and checked the magazine of her rifle. 7 rounds left, more than enough to finish the job, but she found herself hoping the soldiers would last a little longer. After all, good prey was so hard to find these days. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the forest. Night was coming, and with it a whole new set of rules. Echo smiled to herself as she began planning her next move. She had always preferred hunting in the dark anyway. Below her, Jake Morrison was formulating a plan that would either save his team or get them all killed. But in this haunted forest where the normal rules of warfare didn't seem to apply, those might be the only 2 options left. The hunt was entering its final phase, and none of them would survive it unchanged. As darkness crept through the ancient forest like a living thing, Jake Morrison made a decision that went against every survival instinct he possessed. Instead of finding shelter and waiting for dawn, he was going to use the night to hunt the hunter. "She expects us to hole up until morning," he explained to his remaining team as they huddled behind a massive fallen tree. "That's what normal people would do, but we're not normal people, and she's gotten too comfortable picking us off one by one." Walsh winced as he adjusted his wounded shoulder, but his eyes held the same determined fire that Jake had seen in a dozen combat zones. "What's the plan, Chief?" "We split up," Jake said, knowing how dangerous the words sounded even as he spoke them. "Foster, you find a good overwatch position and try to get eyes on her. Ramirez, you're with me. We're going to make enough noise to draw her attention, get her to commit to a position." "And then?" Ramirez asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "Then Walsh comes at her from behind with enough explosives to bring down half the forest if necessary." Jake looked each of his men in the eye. "It's risky, but it's better than waiting here while she picks us apart." Foster was already studying the terrain through his night vision scope. "There's a ridge about 200 yards northwest. Good sight lines, multiple escape routes. I can set up there and try to spot her muzzle flash when she takes her next shot." "How long do you need?" Jake asked. "Give me 30 minutes to get in position, then start making noise." They synchronized their watches and began to separate. Jake felt the familiar weight of command pressing down on him as he watched his men disappear into the darkness. In 12 years of military service, he had never lost a team member to enemy action. Now Tank was dead, and he was about to risk the lives of 3 more good men on a plan that might be pure suicide. But what choice did they have? Echo had been controlling the engagement from the beginning, using her knowledge of the forest and her superior position to dictate every move they made. If they were going to survive, they needed to force her to react to them for a change. Jake and Ramirez moved deeper into the woods, making no effort to conceal their passage. They snapped branches, kicked stones, and talked in voices that carried clearly through the still night air. It felt wrong to every tactical instinct they possessed, but it was the only way to get Echo's attention. "You know," Ramirez said loudly as they stumbled through a particularly dense thicket, "I never thought I'd die in a place like this. Always figured it would be some desert somewhere, or maybe an urban firefight." "Nobody's dying tonight, Doc," Jake replied equally loud. "We're getting out of here and we're taking that psychotic woman down while we do it." They had been making their theatrical progress for about 15 minutes when Echo's voice drifted down from the canopy above them. "Oh, boys, that's just adorable. Do you really think I can't see what you're trying to do?" Jake felt his heart rate spike, but he forced himself to keep walking. The plan depended on Echo believing she still held all the advantages. "Where's your friend with the big rifle?" Echo continued, her voice seeming to move through the trees like smoke. "Don't tell me you left him behind. That would be terribly unsporting." A branch cracked somewhere off to their left, and Jake caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision. But when he turned to look, there was nothing there except shadows and the faint glow of phosphorescent fungi. "She's close," Ramirez whispered, dropping his voice for the first time since they had started their charade. Jake nodded, his hand moving instinctively to his sidearm. According to his watch, Foster should be in position by now. All they needed was for Echo to take a shot and reveal her location. But Echo seemed to sense the trap. Instead of the sharp crack of a rifle, they heard something that made Jake's blood run cold, the sound of Foster screaming. The cry of agony echoed through the forest, cut short abruptly, followed by a wet thud that could only be one thing. Jake's radio crackled to life with Foster's voice, but the words were wrong, all wrong. "Chief, she got me. Shot in the leg, bleeding bad. Need immediate evac to my position." But Foster's voice sounded strange, distorted, like he was speaking through pain that was driving him to the edge of madness. "Foster, stay put," Jake responded, already changing direction toward the ridge where his sniper had set up. "We're coming to you." But even as he spoke, Jake felt doubt gnawing at him. Something about Foster's transmission didn't feel right. The man had been shot before, had worked through injuries that would have incapacitated most people, and Jake had never heard him sound so broken. "It's a trap," Ramirez said quietly, voicing Jake's own suspicions. "She's using Foster to draw us in." Before Jake could respond, another transmission came through their radios. This time it was definitely not Foster's voice. "Very good, little soldier," Echo purred, her words crackling with static. "You're learning to think like a predator instead of prey. But you're too late to save your friend. He lasted longer than most, I'll give him that. Even tried to get off a shot when I put the knife in his back." The rage that filled Jake was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Foster had been more than just a teammate. He had been a friend, a brother in arms who had saved Jake's life more times than either of them could count. And now he was dead, killed by a woman who treated murder like a hobby. "You're dead," Jake snarled into his radio. "You hear me? You're fucking dead." Echo's laughter came back immediately, rich and delighted. "Oh, that's much better. I was getting worried you might be too professional to make this personal, but angry men make mistakes, soldier boy, and I'm counting on you making a big one real soon." Walsh's voice cut through the transmission, tight with pain and fury. "Chief, I'm in position. Give me a target and I'll blow this crazy bitch to hell." But Jake was beyond tactics now, beyond the careful planning that had kept him alive through a dozen deployments. Foster was dead, Tank was dead, and Echo was still out there somewhere treating their lives like a game. He needed to end this, and he needed to end it now. "Walsh, fall back to the extraction point," he ordered. "Ramirez with me, we're going after her." "Chief, that's exactly what she wants," Ramirez protested. "She's baiting us into an ambush." "I don't care," Jake replied, checking his weapon one final time. "I'm done running from this psychopath." They began moving toward Foster's last known position, abandoning all pretense of stealth. Jake's boots crashed through the undergrowth like hammer blows, and he made no effort to avoid the low-hanging branches that tore at his uniform and gear. But as they climbed toward the ridge, Jake began to notice things that didn't make sense. Trees that should have been familiar looked different, twisted into new shapes. Paths that had been clear earlier were now blocked by fallen logs that looked like they had been there for years. And the forest around them seemed to be growing darker and more oppressive with each step they took. "Chief," Ramirez called out, his voice tight with something that might have been fear. "Look at this." Jake turned to see his medic standing beside a tree that had something carved into its bark. Fresh cuts made with a sharp blade spelling out words in letters 2 inches high. "Getting warmer." Below the message, Foster's dog tags hung from a broken branch, swaying gently in the still night air. Jake reached for the tags, but Ramirez grabbed his wrist. "Don't touch them," the medic warned. "Could be booby-trapped." The words had barely left his mouth when a gunshot rang out from directly above them. Bark exploded from the tree where the dog tags hung, and both men dove for cover as Echo's voice drifted down from the canopy. "Smart boy with the medical training," she called out. "Yes, those were wired with a little surprise, would have taken both your hands clean off if you had touched them." Jake rolled behind a fallen log and brought his rifle to bear on the trees above them, but the canopy was too thick to see anything clearly. "Where are you?" he shouted. "Right here," Echo replied, and her voice came from directly behind him. Jake spun around, finger on the trigger, but there was nothing there except empty forest. When he turned back, he found Ramirez lying motionless. On the ground, a tranquilizer dart protruding from his neck. "How?" Jake breathed, his weapon sweeping in desperate arcs as he searched for a target that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Practice, Echo replied, and now her voice came from a different direction entirely. Lots and lots of practice. You boys aren't the first soldiers to stumble into my little domain, and you won't be the last. Jake knelt beside Ramirez, checking for a pulse while keeping his rifle ready. The medic was breathing but unconscious, his face relaxed in a way that suggested the dart had contained some kind of powerful sedative. What do you want? Jake called out, knowing that he was probably talking to empty air but needing to try anyway. I told you before, Echo replied, her voice seeming to circle him like a vulture. I want the hunt, the challenge, the look in a strong man's eyes when he realizes he's not going home. A twig snapped somewhere to Jake's left and he spun toward the sound. But there was nothing there except shadows and the endless maze of trees that seemed to mock his every move. You're alone now, Echo continued, her voice closer than before. No team to protect, no backup coming, no clever plans left to try. Just you and me and these wonderful old trees that have seen so much death over the years. Jake Morrison crouched in the darkness beside Ramirez's unconscious form, his rifle trained on shadows that seemed to shift and move with malevolent purpose. The forest had become a living nightmare around him, full of sounds that shouldn't exist and movements that defied explanation. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he couldn't abandon his medic, even if staying meant certain death. You're wondering if you should leave him. Echo's voice drifted through the trees, reading his thoughts with disturbing accuracy, wondering if saving yourself is worth more than loyalty to a man who can't help you anymore. Jake gritted his teeth and forced himself to remain silent. Echo was trying to get inside his head, to break down the bonds of brotherhood that held military units together. But Jake had been through too much with these men to abandon them now. I've seen it before, Echo continued, her voice seeming to come from a dozen different directions at once. Strong men, trained soldiers, reduced to frightened animals when they realize death is stalking them. Some run, some break down and cry. Some try to bargain with me, offering information or money in exchange for their lives. A branch creaked overhead, and Jake caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision. But when he swung his rifle toward the sound, there was nothing there except darkness and the faint phosphorescent glow of the strange fungi that covered the ancient trees. What I've never seen, Echo said, her voice now coming from directly behind him, is someone like you, still protecting his people even when there's no hope left. It's almost admirable. Jake spun around, finger on the trigger, but again found nothing except empty forest. The woman moved like smoke, like a ghost made of shadow and silence. Fighting her was like trying to wrestle with the wind. Show yourself, Jake snarled, his patience finally breaking. Stop hiding in the trees like a coward and face me. Echo's laughter rang out through the forest, rich and genuinely amused. A coward? Oh, soldier boy, you really don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? I'm not hiding from you. I'm savoring you. Like a fine wine that should be appreciated slowly. Jake checked his watch and felt his heart sink. It had been almost 3 hours since Walsh had headed for the extraction point. By now, the explosives expert should have reached the landing zone and called for emergency evacuation. Help should be coming, but what if Walsh hadn't made it either? What if Echo had taken him down too, leaving Jake as the sole survivor of a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong? As if reading his thoughts again, Echo's voice cut through the darkness. Your friend with the hurt shoulder made it almost halfway to your little landing zone before I caught up with him. He put up quite a fight, I'll give him that. Even tried to set off one of his bombs when he realized he couldn't escape. Jake felt something die inside him at those words. Walsh, Tank, Foster, Ramirez, his entire team gone. Men he had served with for years, friends who had trusted him to bring them home safe. And he had failed them all. Tried? Jake asked, latching on to the one word that suggested Walsh might still be alive. Oh yes, Echo replied, her voice closer now. I stopped him just in time. Couldn't have him bringing down half the forest with his little fireworks show, but don't worry, he's quite comfortable now, sleeping peacefully under the stars. Jake closed his eyes and tried to center himself, to push past the grief and rage that threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking. Echo wanted him angry, wanted him to make mistakes. But there had to be a way to turn the tables, to use her confidence against her. You know, he called out, forcing his voice to remain calm. For someone who claims to be such a great hunter, You sure do talk a lot. Most snipers I know understand the value of silence. The forest went quiet for several seconds. When Echo spoke again, there was a new edge to her voice. Something that might have been irritation. Most snipers you know haven't been perfecting their craft in these woods for as long as I have. Most snipers you know haven't learned to become one with the forest itself. Jake began moving slowly away from Ramirez, drawing Echo's attention away from the unconscious medic. If he was going to die in this place, he could at least make sure she had to work for it. How long? He asked, genuinely curious despite the circumstances. How long have you been out here? Long enough to forget what the outside world looks like, Echo replied. Long enough to forget why I ever wanted to leave this place. The forest provides everything I need. Food, shelter, entertainment. Entertainment, Jake repeated, his voice flat. Is that what you call murder? I call it natural selection, Echo said. And now there was a philosophical quality to her voice that was somehow more disturbing than outright hostility. The weak die, the strong survive, and the forest grows stronger from their bones. It's the oldest law in the world. Jake was climbing now, working his way up a steep slope covered in loose rocks and fallen leaves. His boots slipped with each step, sending small avalanches of debris rolling down behind him. But he needed higher ground, needed some kind of tactical advantage. You're heading for the old observation tower, Echo observed, apparently tracking his movement effortlessly. Built by the Forestry Service back in the 60s, before they realized this place was too dangerous for regular patrols. Good choice. Excellent fields of fire from up there. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. How could she know where he was going when he had barely decided himself? Unless you're walking right into another trap, Echo finished, once again reading his thoughts with disturbing accuracy. Which I'm afraid you are. Jake stopped moving and pressed his back against a large tree, trying to think through his options. But the truth was becoming increasingly clear. He had no options. Echo controlled this forest the way a spider controls its web, and he was caught in the center of it with no way out. You're wondering how I do it, Echo said, her voice now coming from directly above him. How I know what you're thinking, where you're going, what you're planning. Would you like to know the secret? Despite himself, Jake found that he did want to know. Tell me. The trees, Echo said simply. They whisper to me. Tell me where you've been, where you're going, what you're feeling. This forest is alive, soldier boy. More alive than you could possibly imagine, and I've learned to listen to its voice. Jake looked up at the canopy above him, at the massive branches that interwove like the fingers of giant hands. In the faint glow of the fungi, he could almost believe that the trees were watching him, judging him, finding him wanting. You're insane, he said quietly. Am I? Echo replied. Or have I simply evolved beyond the need for the artificial boundaries that limit other people? In the outside world, there are laws, rules, social contracts that prevent people from embracing their true nature. But here in the deep woods, only one law matters: survive or die. Jake heard movement behind him and spun around, rifle ready. But instead of Echo, he found Ramirez stumbling through the undergrowth, apparently having awakened from whatever drug had knocked him unconscious. Chief, the medic called out, his voice slurred but determined. Where are the others? Jake felt his heart break a little more at the hope in Ramirez's voice. Gone, Doc, all of them. It's just us now. Ramirez absorbed this information with the stoicism of a professional soldier, but Jake could see the pain in his eyes. Orders, Chief? Before Jake could answer, Echo's voice rang out through the forest one more time. How touching. The last two little soldiers standing together against the darkness. It almost makes me feel sorry for what I'm about to do to you. Jake grabbed Ramirez's arm and began pulling him up the slope toward whatever waited for them at the observation tower. We climb, he said grimly, and we make our last stand somewhere with a view. Behind them, Echo's laughter followed them into the darkness like the sound of approaching death. The final act of their deadly drama was about to begin, and Jake Morrison knew that only one of them would live to see the sunrise. But he also knew something that Echo didn't. Seals never surrender, and they never leave their people behind. If he was going to die in this haunted forest, he was going to take the ghost in the trees with him. The observation tower loomed ahead of them through the darkness, its metal framework rising like a skeleton against the star-filled sky. And somewhere in the shadows below, Echo was already moving to cut off their escape. to end the hunt that had consumed the better part of a night and cost 3 good men their lives. The final confrontation was at hand. The old forestry observation tower rose 60 feet into the night sky, its rusted metal framework groaning in the wind like the bones of some ancient beast. Jake and Ramirez climbed the narrow ladder with their rifles slung across their backs, each rung bringing them closer to what might be their final battlefield. "Good choice." Echo's voice drifted up from the darkness below. "I was hoping you'd make it interesting at the end." Jake reached the observation platform first and immediately took up a defensive position, his rifle trained on the forest canopy that surrounded the tower on all sides. The platform was about 12 feet square, with a chest-high railing and excellent sight lines in every direction. It was a good place to make a last stand, but it was also a trap with no way out. Ramirez joined him on the platform, still groggy from whatever drug Echo had used on him. "How much ammo do you have left, Chief?" he asked, checking his own magazine. "2 full mags," Jake replied. "You?" "1.5." Ramirez looked out at the ocean of trees that stretched to the horizon in every direction. "Think that'll be enough?" Before Jake could answer, a gunshot rang out from the forest below. The bullet struck the metal railing inches from Jake's head, sending sparks flying into the night air. "She's testing our range," Jake observed, dropping into a crouch behind the limited cover the platform provided, seeing how we react. Another shot followed, this one aimed at Ramirez. The bullet passed so close to the medic's ear that he could feel the heat of its passage. But instead of fear, Jake saw something else in his teammate's eyes. Anger. Cold professional anger at the woman who had killed their friends. "I've got movement," Ramirez reported, pointing toward a cluster of trees about 200 yards to the northeast. "Third tree from the left, about 40 feet up." Jake swung his rifle toward the position and fired 3 quick shots, but the bullets found only empty air. Echo was already gone, her laughter echoing through the forest like the cry of a hunting owl. "You boys are learning," her voice called out, seeming to come from a completely different direction now. "But you're still thinking like ground soldiers. You need to start thinking in 3 dimensions if you want to survive the next 5 minutes." Jake studied the canopy around them, noting how the massive branches intertwined to create a network of natural highways, 40 feet above the ground. Echo wasn't just hiding in the trees. She was living in them, moving through them like they were her natural element. "She's not human," Ramirez said quietly, voicing what Jake had been thinking. "No one moves through trees like that. Not without equipment, not without making noise." "She's human enough to bleed," Jake replied grimly, "and if she bleeds, we can kill her." But even as he spoke, Jake was beginning to understand that they were facing something beyond normal human capabilities. Echo had claimed the forest spoke to her, and watching her move through the canopy with impossible grace, Jake was starting to believe it. The next shot came without warning, punching through the metal floor of the platform between Jake's feet. If he had been standing 6 inches to the left, it would have blown his leg off at the knee. Shooting through the trees, Jake realized. She's using ricochets and deflections to hit targets she can't see directly. It was a level of marksmanship that bordered on supernatural, requiring an intimate knowledge of ballistics and an almost mystical understanding of how bullets behaved in different environments. Jake had never seen anything like it in his 12 years of military service. "There," Ramirez said suddenly, pointing toward a massive oak tree about 150 yards away. "I saw muzzle flash." Jake fired immediately, putting 3 rounds into the area where Ramirez had indicated. This time, he was rewarded with the sound of splintering wood and a curse that was definitely feminine. "First blood to us," Jake said with grim satisfaction. But Echo's response was immediate and devastating. A barrage of shots rang out from multiple positions, as if she had somehow split herself into 6 different snipers. Bullets struck the platform from every direction, punching holes in the metal flooring and sending fragments of steel flying like shrapnel. Jake and Ramirez pressed themselves against the platform's deck, trying to present the smallest possible targets. But there was nowhere to hide, no real cover on the exposed observation deck. "She's got us pinned," Ramirez shouted over the gunfire. "We need to move." But there was nowhere to move to. They were 60 feet in the air on a platform with one ladder leading down to certain death. Echo had them exactly where she wanted them, trapped and helpless. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind an ominous silence that was somehow more terrifying than the bullets had been. "Now do you understand?" Echo called out, her voice carrying clearly through the still night air. "You never had a chance." From the moment you set foot in my forest, you were already dead. I just let you think you had hope because it makes the hunt more interesting." Jake felt something he had never experienced in combat before. True despair. Not just the fear of death, but the absolute certainty that everything he had done, every tactical decision he had made, had been anticipated and countered by an enemy who operated on a level beyond human understanding. But then he looked at Ramirez, saw the determination still burning in the young medic's eyes, and felt his own resolve strengthen. They might be outmatched, they might be doomed, but they were still United States Navy SEALs. They would fight until the last bullet was fired and the last breath was drawn. "You know what I think?" Jake called out to the forest below. "I think you're scared." Silence stretched for several seconds. When Echo spoke again, there was a new quality to her voice, something that might have been uncertainty. "Scared? Of two half-dead soldiers trapped on a platform with nowhere to run? Scared that we might actually hurt you," Jake continued, playing the only psychological card he had left. "You've been playing with us all night, taking your time, savoring the hunt. But you could have killed us hours ago if you wanted to. Instead, you've been dragging it out, making it last. That tells me something. And what would that be?" Echo asked, but Jake could hear the edge creeping into her voice. "That you're lonely," Jake said, the insight hitting him like a physical blow. "You've been alone in these woods for so long that you don't want the game to end. Because when we're dead, you'll be alone again." The forest went completely silent. No wind, no night sounds, no whisper of movement through the trees. Even the strange phosphorescent fungi seemed to dim, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. When Echo spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller somehow, more human. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the words carried no conviction. "How long has it been since you talked to another human being?" Jake pressed, sensing weakness for the first time all night. "Really talked, not just taunted and threatened? How long since someone looked at you and saw a person instead of a monster?" "Shut up," Echo snapped, the mask of control finally slipping. "You don't know anything about me." But Jake did know because he had seen it before in soldiers who had been deployed too long in hostile territory, cut off from human contact and civilization. The forest hadn't just been Echo's hunting ground. It had been her prison. "What's your real name?" Jake asked gently. "Not Echo. Your name before you came to this place." The silence stretched for almost a full minute. When Echo spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Sarah," she said. "My name was Sarah." And in that moment, Jake Morrison realized he might have found the key to ending this nightmare alive. But he also realized that the woman who had been hunting them all night was as much a victim of this place as they were. The question now was whether he could save her, or whether the forest had claimed her so completely that Sarah was already dead, leaving only Echo behind. The name hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Sarah. For the first time all night, Jake felt like he was talking to a human being instead of a force of nature. "Sarah's a nice name," Jake said carefully, keeping his voice gentle. "How long have you been in these woods, Sarah?" The silence stretched for so long that Jake began to think she wouldn't answer. When her voice came back, it was fractured, uncertain, like someone trying to remember a half-forgotten dream. I don't know. Time moves differently here. The seasons blur together. I came here to... She trailed off, struggling with memories that seemed to slip away like smoke. "To hide?" Jake suggested. "To disappear," Sarah corrected, and the pain in her voice was unmistakable. "After what happened in Syria, after my unit was... after I was the only one who..." Jake felt understanding dawn like a cold sunrise. PTSD, survivor's guilt. A sniper who had watched her team die and blamed herself for living. He had seen it before. Soldiers who couldn't handle the weight of being the only one to make it home. "You were military," Jake said. It wasn't a question. "Marine Corps," Sarah replied. And for a moment her voice carried an echo of the pride she had once felt. "Scout sniper. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. 87 confirmed kills. What happened to your team?" The gunshot that answered him came from a different position entirely, smashing into the platform's railing with enough force to spray metal fragments across the deck. But Jake could hear the pain in that shot, the way Sarah's perfect marksmanship had wavered with emotion. "IED," she said, her voice hollow. "Roadside bomb that should have killed all of us. But I was in overwatch position, 300 yards back. I watched them die through my scope, watched them burn, and I couldn't do anything to help them. Jake exchanged a look with Ramirez. Both men understood the weight of survivor's guilt, the way it could eat at a soldier's soul until there was nothing left but self-hatred, and the need to punish oneself for the crime of living. "So you came here," Jake said. "To this forest." "To disappear. To die," Sarah corrected. "I came here to die. But this place, it wouldn't let me. It fed me, sheltered me, gave me purpose, gave me new targets to hunt." "How many?" Ramirez asked quietly. "Enough," Sarah replied. And the word carried the weight of years of killing. Hikers who got lost, research teams who pushed too deep into the woods, military units like yours who came looking for things that should stay hidden. Jake felt sick as he realized the scope of what they were dealing with. Sarah hadn't just killed his team. She had been murdering people in these woods for years, turning her trauma into a weapon against anyone unlucky enough to cross her path. "Sarah," he said carefully, "you know this isn't what your team would have wanted for you. They wouldn't want you living like this, killing innocent people." "Innocent?" Sarah's laugh was bitter and broken. "Nobody who comes into these woods is innocent. They come looking for secrets, for things that should be left alone. They come with guns and equipment and the arrogance of people who think they can conquer anything. We came looking for a terrorist," Jake said. "Someone who was planning to kill civilians." "Lies," Sarah snapped. "The military doesn't send SEALs after terrorists in the middle of nowhere. You came for the same reason all the others did. You came for the research station." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What research station?" "The one hidden in the heart of the forest," Sarah replied. "The one where they were conducting experiments that violated every treaty, every moral code. The one I destroyed 3 years ago before it could spread its poison to the outside world." Understanding dawned on Jake like a hammer blow. There had been no terrorists to extract. Their real mission had been to investigate reports of a military research facility that had gone dark, presumably overrun by hostile forces. Sarah had been protecting the world from something far worse than her own madness. "What kind of experiments?" Ramirez asked, his medical training making him curious despite the circumstances. "Biological weapons," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "designed to target specific genetic markers, to kill only certain populations while leaving others untouched. They were going to test it on villages in Eastern Europe, see how effectively they could commit genocide without anyone knowing it was intentional." Jake felt his world shift as he realized the true nature of their situation. Sarah wasn't just a traumatized veteran who had snapped. She was a hero who had sacrificed her sanity to stop something monstrous, and now he and his team had been sent to clean up the evidence of her heroism. "The dog tags we found," Jake said slowly, "those belong to the research team." "Security contractors," Sarah confirmed. "Mercenaries who were paid to keep the scientists safe while they perfected their weapons. I picked them off one by one, just like I did your friends. And the research station, burned to the ground. Every computer, every sample, every document. I made sure nothing survived." Sarah's voice carried a note of satisfaction that was both admirable and terrifying. Jake made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he possessed. He stood up on the platform, making himself a perfect target, and laid his rifle down at his feet. "Sarah," he called out, "I'm not armed anymore. I want to make you a deal." "Chief, what are you doing?" Ramirez hissed, but Jake ignored him. "I'm listening," Sarah replied, though Jake could hear the suspicion in her voice. "You've been alone in these woods for 3 years," Jake said. "Living like an animal, killing anyone who comes near you. That's not living, Sarah, that's just a slower way of dying." "And what would you know about it?" Sarah asked, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I know that my team is dead because you're protecting a secret that doesn't need protecting anymore," Jake replied. "The research station is gone. The weapons are destroyed. Your mission is complete. But you're still fighting a war that ended 3 years ago." The forest went silent again, but this time Jake could sense something different in the stillness. Not the predatory patience of a hunter, but the desperate hope of someone who had been lost for so long that they had forgotten what home looked like. "Come down from the trees, Sarah," Jake said gently. "Let us help you find your way back to the world." "I can't," Sarah whispered, and Jake could hear tears in her voice. "I've done too much. Killed too many people. There's no way back from what I've become." "There's always a way back," Jake insisted. "But you have to want it. You have to choose to stop being Echo and start being Sarah again." The silence stretched for several minutes. Jake was beginning to think he had lost her when a figure dropped from the trees onto the platform beside them, with cat-like grace. Sarah was smaller than Jake had expected, probably no more than 5'6", with long brown hair that had been woven with leaves and bark to create natural camouflage. Her face was painted with mud and ash, but underneath the war paint, Jake could see the remnants of the woman she had once been. "My rifle's empty," she said quietly, setting the weapon down beside Jake's. "I used my last bullet on your sniper friend." Ramirez had his sidearm halfway out of its holster, but Jake motioned for him to stand down. Sarah wasn't a threat anymore. She was just a broken soldier who had been fighting alone for too long. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, looking out at the forest that had been her prison and her kingdom for 3 years. Jake pulled out his radio and began broadcasting on the emergency frequency. "This is SEAL Team 7 requesting immediate extraction. We have one survivor from the missing research team who needs medical attention and debriefing." Sarah looked at him with something that might have been gratitude. "You're going to lie for me?" "I'm going to tell them you've been held captive by hostile forces for 3 years," Jake replied. "That you escaped and helped us complete our mission. Everything else is classified above our pay grade." As the sound of helicopter rotors approached through the darkness, Sarah reached into her pack and pulled out a small metal object. "Tank's dog tags. I'm sorry about your friends," she said, pressing the tags into Jake's hand. "They fought bravely, especially the big one. He never stopped trying to protect the rest of you." Jake pocketed the tags and looked out at the forest that had claimed so much. His team was dead, but their sacrifice had helped him save someone who might otherwise have been lost forever to the darkness between the trees. The helicopter touched down in the clearing below, its searchlights cutting through the night like white knives. As they climbed down from the observation tower, Jake couldn't help but wonder what would happen to Sarah when they reached civilization. Would she be able to readjust to the outside world, or would the forest call her back? But as they walked toward the helicopter, Sarah reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong and steady, the grip of someone who had decided to fight for her life instead of running from it. "Thank you," she said simply. Jake squeezed her hand in return. "Welcome back to the world, Marine." The helicopter lifted off into the night sky, carrying them away from the ancient forest and toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the trees stood silent and watchful, keeping their secrets until the next team of soldiers came looking for answers in the darkness between the branches. But for now, at least, the hunt was over.